Bert's on, Mendy, and I see Phil is on. Just wonderful, and just wonderful to have everyone. Well, this parsha is Parshat Kitetse, and it includes one of the most difficult texts that we have in all of the Torah, and it is the text that deals with the annihilation of Amalek. It's a very, very problematic text. I mean, the Torah is, from my perspective, is aspirational. It's not just the halakha. Jewish law is not just a legal system. It's an aspirational system. As a matter of fact, if I were asked, what is the difference between the Torah legal code, the code that deals with interpersonal relationships and laws of torts and laws of damages and all kinds of laws? That's why we have civil courts and criminal courts. What is fundamentally the difference between the Jewish approach to law and, let us say, the American approach? And I would say that the Jewish approach is what could be called aspirational. In other words, the law is part of a larger system to help create a society of tzedakah u'mishpat, of righteousness and justice. That's not to say that other types of law do not have that in mind, but as a collective whole, I don't believe so. In Judaism, extremely aspirational, very, very mission-centered. I'll give you an example of a difference between these two types of laws. The Torah says, "Lo tamod adam re'echa." One should not stand by as a neighbor's life is in jeopardy. The Kitty Genovese story going back to the late 60s, where she was abused and raped. And I think there was a play that came out about it called The 39th Witness. I'm not exactly sure I have it right, but this is close. That 38 witnesses looked out their windows, saw the attack, but didn't want to get involved. It was the 39th witness who apparently finally did call the police, but as I remember it, only after calling their lawyer to try to understand what are the ramifications, how involved would they become in any way liable somehow if they were to call the police. And by the time they came, she was gone. So it's called the 39th witness. Now, in American law, to my knowledge, I heard this from Rabbi Saul Berman, my dear friend, out of 50 states, 48 states would say that if I see someone drowning and I have the capacity to save that individual and I don't, there is no legal culpability. Yes, I may have violated an ethical principle, yes, but no legal culpability. In the Torah, in the halakha, if I have the capacity to save life and I don't, it's not just an ethical no-no, it is that I have seriously violated the law, could be hauled into a bet-din, could be hauled into a court of law, and I could be punished accordingly. It's a legal violation. That has something to do with...
Is that also, if at the risk of your own life, you have to save somebody?
I would imagine then not. And then we get into the intricacies of the law. But let's think about a kind of absolutist scenario that your life would not be in danger. It's a toddler. God forbid, a toddler is in very, very shallow water And unless you jump in just to pick up the child could, God forbid, lose her or his life. So in such a situation, you're legally liable. I mean, the Gemara does talk about if you're in a desert and you have only enough water for yourself to get through the desert, that's all you have, and you're walking with a friend, what do you do? And the Gemara decides, your life, your life comes first. But my point is that Judaism is mission-centered, that its laws are meant to be part of a larger goal. The larger goal is Vasita Hayasha Batov B'nei Hashem. What does God want from us? A similar pasuk in Micha, Ki emasot mishpat v'avat chesed, v'atznei alecha tivilokecha. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with the Lord. So the Amalek issue is a very, very hard issue. As evil as Amalek was to murder men, women, and children, Saul loses his kingship. He loses his rulership because he didn't kill all of the Amalekites. Although, interestingly enough, it's not as well known that in chapter 15 of Samuel 1, he actually tragically, he kills the youngsters as he was asked to do by Samuel, and he left the king alive, Agag. He left the king alive. Maybe kings have all kinds of treaties with other kings. I won't damage you, you won't damage me. I'd like to think that if he made the mistake, in quotes, of not taking the lives of children, he would have been excused. So there are all some assaults that are being done on this, but it's really a complicated text, very complicated, as are the texts of genocidal war in the book of Joshua. Thank God, notwithstanding what we find in Tanakh, we are not written law Jews. We are Jews who understand the written law as it is explicated by the oral tradition. And when one looks at the oral tradition, it's a very, very different story. As a matter of fact, the Israeli army, excuse me, has a policy called Torah HaNeshek, purity of arms, that was very influenced by the oral tradition. And that's why, as we know, the Israeli army is so careful in its attitude and the way it goes to war, the leaflets being dropped. It's very, very different. Rabbi Soloveitchik was asked whether he thought the Nazis fall into the category of Amalek. And if they are Amalek, the evil of the evil, so we can go to war with them and kill men, women, and children. And he responded very strongly, there is no Amalek today. Yes, we have to defend ourselves against the Nazis. We have to defend ourselves to make sure we're protected, but we can't take innocent life. So whatever I'm going to say today, I'd like it to be within the framework of understanding, as we understand Amalek today, more generically. That is, Amalek, let us say, it represents evil in the world. And we are being challenged and mandated to overcome evil, to dispel darkness with light. If there is evil out there, we're to obliterate the evil. And it's within that framework. I know that I'm shying away from that big question of Amalek. How could the Torah have, thank you, Tov. Tovali brings water. How could the Torah have told us to murder men, women, and children? But let me give you that framework, and I want to show you something that I find fascinating. So we're now in chapter 25, sentence 17. Shuli will put this up. Very grateful to Shuli. Here's what it says.
Amalek. Remember Amalek.
Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. It's a little bit further up. Remember what Amalek did to you. B'derech b'tzeichem mitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. Look at that first word, Zachor. That is why many of the survivors on Yom HaShoah on different days, they wear the yellow badges, and on the yellow badge, it says Zachor, so to nicht vergessen. One should never forget, as was famously said by Santanaya. I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong, but he said, those who are going to forget the past are doomed to repeat the same mistake again. Asher karcha baderech. Let's look at the next sentence. Asher karcha baderech, which means he happened upon you. How undeterred by fear of God, Asher karcha baderech, vayizanev b'cho kol hanecheshalim acharecha. He surprised you on the march, interesting translation, when you were famished and weary, v'ata ayef v'yageya, v'lo yarei Elohim. And this translation is a translation that I would humbly try to tweak. V'lo yarei Elohim, they had no sense of fear of God. And in the commentaries, they point out the difference between Yirat Hashem and Yirat Elohim. Yirat Elohim means you don't have the fundamentals of life, and you're able to violate in the most grotesque way the basic laws of decency. For example, when he commands infanticide, that the little boys be murdered, the language was that the midwives, they feared God. They had the elementary ethical decency. But the Amalekites, they didn't even have that. Now comes the command. V'haya v'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv. And it'll come to pass when God grants you safety from all the enemies around you. In the land which God gives you to inherit, the land of Israel. Here it is. Timche et zecher Amalek. You are to wipe out the memory of Amalek. Mitachat hashamayim, from beneath the heavens. Lo tishkach. Lots said about this. If it already said Zachor, remember, why does it have to say Lo tishkach? You shall not forget. Now here, all it says is Timche et zecher Amalek. You shall wipe out the memory of Amalek. But Deuteronomos, is the repetition of the law. And we actually, in Exodus chapter 17, we have the actual story of what occurred. So let's take a look at 17. If we can just pick it up just a few sentences, I want to give everyone a sense of what happened. Let's go all the way up, probably to sentence 10, if you don't mind. Here it is. A little further up, sentence 8 maybe. Here it is. Vayavo Amalek. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, because Joshua was the war person, that wasn't Moshe's thing. Pick some troops for us, if you can point out where we are, Shuli, thank you so much, and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow, I will station myself on the top of the hill. This is what Moses says to Joshua, with the rod of God in my hand. Let's take a look at the next sentence. And Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And then the text says us, and it came to pass that whenever Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. The rabbis say if he held up his hands, he was pointing heavenward, And so that was the signal to the fighters to look to God for help and understand that this was God's war. And I want to quickly say, I appreciate that it's God's war, and it has to be remembered that if God makes a command, that's a serious command. But there's nothing more dangerous than a war that one conducts in the name of God. Nothing more dangerous, even as this was a war that God had commanded. So when Moses lifts his hands, as you can see, this is difficult text. When he held his hands up, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. And then the sentence goes on and says, Moses, his hands were very heavy. We can go down just a little bit. But Moses' hands grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. So now he's sitting in a swivel chair, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set, and Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Now let's look at then the mandate. So this is the book of Exodus. What we read was the way Moses repeated the command in Deuteronomy. This is right after the Exodus from Egypt. The book of Deuteronomy is 40 years later, but let's take a look at it. Then the Lord said to Moses, inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. Here's what God says. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Interesting. It doesn't say you will blot out. God is speaking here. God says, I will blot out. Emche et zecher Amalek. Just two more sentences, Shuli. Thank you. And Moses built an altar. This was the way they expressed thanksgiving. Vayikra Shemo, and Moses called it Adonai Nisi, the Lord is my miracle. Now comes a very famous sentence. Vayomer, and he said, this is now Moses speaking, Ki yad al keska. He said, it means hands upon the throne of Adonai. Milchama ladonai ba'amalek midor dor. Again, I think this translation, and we've been working with the Sfaria, I'd rather translate it to mean Moses built an altar. He called it the Lord my miracle. And he said, Moses is speaking, for the hand is on the throne of God. Very difficult text. The Lord maintains the war against Amalek from generation to generation. Again, I'll repeat that. And he said, for the hand is on the throne of God. The Lord maintains the war against Amalek from generation to generation. So I want to begin just with a point related to what we were saying about the broader idea of Amalek. Then I want to stop and get your input. So give me just another 3-4 minutes. And then if we have time, we'll proceed. Or this is such an important topic that perhaps we'll continue it next week. So let's look at this sentence. The sentence says, God is saying, my hand, Moses is saying that God's hand is on the throne of God. Let's look at the word, the Hebrew word yad, because hand, that's the third word here in this sentence. The third word, going back a little bit, there we go. He said, ki yad, the hand, referring to God's hand. You know, in the Torah, This is my son's area. He's thinking about writing a book about God in rabbinic literature. In the Torah, God is very corporeal. God is very physical. It's the hand of God, the nostrils of God, breathing out fire. By the time we come to Maimonides, one of Maimonides' 13 principles is God is incorporeal. God has no body. But in the Bible, God has body. Not that he has a body. It's, of course, anthropomorphic. The Torah speaks in language we can understand. But it does say, because the hand of God, now let's look further. Al is upon. Case. What in the world does case mean? Now here the translation of case is throne. Case is a word which is short for kisei. Kisei means a seat, a throne. The hand of God is upon the throne, and look at the next word, Yah. Yah is God's name. But Yah is not God's full name. The name of God, as you can see 2 words down the line, Milchama Hashem, is Yud Hey Vav Hey. That's a Yud Hey. If we go further, Milchama Ladonai, see Milchama Ladonai, shall we? Milchama Bayomer Kiyad, there it is. You see, the La is a prefix, which means Milchama, for or to the Lord. And if you look at the word the Lord, it's Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud Hey Vav Hey. So here, interestingly, what Moses is saying, God takes this promise that his hand is on his own throne. But the rabbis immediately notice that the word throne is written incompletely. The name of God is written incompletely. Then it continues, Milchama Ladonai Ba'amalek. There will be a war. There will be a war with God's help, Ba'amalek, against, the Lord maintains a war against Amalek, Midor Dor, from generation to generation. So I want to make 2 observations. The first observation we've just made, and that is when God declares that there will be war against Amalek, he takes an oath and says there will be a war against Amalek. And God says, I take an oath on my throne. But when God takes the oath on his throne that he will war against Amalek, the term for throne, I know this may be a bit intricate and difficult, but the term for throne is not complete. It says case and not kisei. And it says ka. The name of God is not even complete. That's my first observation. My second observation, it keeps talking about Milchama Ladonai Ba'amalek. And as a matter of fact, let's take a look at sentence 14. It says there, and the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memory in your book and proclaim this in the ears of Joshua. Ki macho emchet. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek. So who does the blotting out? Who does the destroying of Amalek? And I'm going to destroy the memory of Amalek. It's God. Ki macho emchet. It's first person singular. I will utterly blot out. But if we look at the way Moses repeats the law, he doesn't say that God is mandated that God tells us he will destroy Amalek. But when Moses speaks, Moses says to the children of Israel, Timche etzech Amalek. Let's go back to Deuteronomy. I want everyone to see it. Try to remember that komo, here it is. You see the second line from the bottom. Timche etzech Amalek. You will wipe out the memory of Amalek. That's a slight deflection. In Exodus, that's not what it says. It says, Emche etzech Amalek. I will destroy the memory of Amalek. Very good, Shuz, thank you. There it says, God says, I will destroy them. And when Moses repeats it in Deuteronomy, he's saying, not that God says I'll destroy them, but rather, Timche, you will destroy them. Let's just go back to the Timche just for the moment, so everyone can see it, Timche. So if I could face everyone, because I want to stop here just to summarize. We're studying one of the most, maybe the most difficult section of the Torah that we've been studying together for not years, but some of us for decades. This is one of the hardest texts, very hard text. And, it's a text that we're very careful about. There's a Parshat Zachor. Everyone comes to synagogue, and this is what we're listening to. We're listening about obliterating, absolutely, completely destroying all of Amalek, men, women, children. And there are two issues. The first issue is upon whom is given the command to destroy Amalek. In the book of Exodus, God says, I will destroy Amalek. And in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses understands that and he tells the people, you, in other words, the children of Israel, will destroy Amalek. That's my first question. And the second question, going back to God's command, when God says, I will destroy Amalek, and he takes an oath to that effect, I promise on my throne, why is God's name incomplete there? Why is it written Yah, Yud-Hey, and not Yud-Hey Vav-Hey? Why? Why is God's throne not Kisei, but it's Case? Now here's an example of the intricacies. Let me just show you. We're now studying in the Daf Yomi Kiddushin. So this is what a text looks like. We can show this to everybody. This is the text. Now this text is an easy text because it's vocalized. It has dots. But there are pages after pages in Sanhedrin about these texts. And a lot of it emerges from what we're talking about. This text is elliptical. It's obtuse. It's hard to understand what. And we're pointing out the difficulties, and therefore it requires a lot of machinations, a lot of thinking to understand exactly what it means. I want to open it up, and I want to hear what you have to say about the questions I offered. And it doesn't have to be on the questions, just what you're feeling about what we're talking about in our discussion about Amalek. Anybody?
Yes.
Tova's hand has been up for quite a while. And then let me just see who else. Oh, lots of hands. Okay. Tova, Ruby, Estelle. Am I missing anyone? Vivian. Oh, Arnie and Vivian. Let me just write this all down so everyone knows who's coming next. Tova, Ruby, Estelle, Arnie, Vivian. Okay. Tova, go ahead.
Okay. So, this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. And I think there are two issues here with Amalek. One, God is going to remember Amalek and wipe out Amalek. That is one thing. And I think, but there's another thing where we say Zechor et Amalek, and that is Israel's responsibility, because the ones that Amalek attacked were the weak ones, and the ones who were at the end of the group, and they were the ones who were attacked, and the Torah tells us this. And then we say, Zechor et Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to your weakest. You have Israel. You have to Zechor et Amalek, and protect the weakest. They should be in your midst and not on your borders to be hurt. The other thing is it's going to be destroyed, but God will help you to destroy. So God has a responsibility with Amalek and its destruction. But Israel has a responsibility, Zechoret Amalek, what your responsibility is in reference to Amalek.
Beautiful, Tova. I want to just mention, since we're talking about Amalek, just yesterday there was another terrorist attack, and a woman, her name is Batsheva, and she was coming out of southern Hebron, and she had gotten a ride with a man, and her, I believe, 12-year-old daughter was in the back seat, and terrorists came from nowhere, and they started firing. I think they fired 26, 28 bullets, maybe more, and she was tragically murdered. She was murdered, and the male driver was seriously injured, and somehow the daughter survived. As a matter of fact, you can get clips online of her funeral. She was buried in Gush Etzion. Gush Etzion, actually, Toby and I have plots in Gush Etzion. Gush Etzion is the area that encompasses Efrat as well. She was buried there, and it was hard to believe, but her daughter, 12 years old, who physically left unscathed, somehow the bullet never touched her, but emotionally she'll be scarred forever, seriously scarred. She spoke at her mother's burial. It's really quite something. And she was buried in Gush Etzion because she was 40 years old, 40 years old, and she was an early childhood teacher. And she taught in Efrat. Efrat is the city where our daughter and dear son-in-laws, like our son Ilana and Michael, live, and where their 9 children were raised, and 2 are married with children. And I also want to mention that the day before, there was a father and son. They were up in the north of Samaria. This occurred in the south, in Judea, but up north in Huwara. So things seemed to be going just fine, and they were getting a car wash. I don't know why they went there, but they did, and out of nowhere, both of them were murdered. And the father's name, I try to remember, was Shai, and the son's name, Aviat. And they too have been murdered. They came from the city of Ashdod, which is down south. There are 2 major ports in Israel. Up north, of course, it's Haifa, and down south, it's Ashdod. And when you read that, first of all, the way it's covered, I mean, I have over here, I don't read the Times, but the Wall Street Journal, quoting the Associated Press, they have like a small article about this. I just want to read to you the first paragraph, and Tova just kind of lit a fire within me to mention this. Here's what it says. Israeli woman dies as violence flares. That's the headlines. I'll just read it to you. A suspected Palestinian gunman killed an Israeli woman and seriously wounded a man in the south of the occupied West Bank on Monday, Israeli authorities said, as violence flared in the restive territory 2 days after a shooting that killed 2 Israelis. Then it continues. Elsewhere in the West Bank, an Israeli military raid triggered fighting with Palestinians south of Nablus. Palestinian health officials said, leaving 8 Palestinians wounded, and so on. Just the balancing shooters. These are not shooters. These are terrorists who didn't just kill, they murdered. They murdered people. And, you know, when we were in Israel most recently, we came on the last morning of the Shiva of the D family. Leo D lost his wife and 2 daughters. He was left with 2 daughters and his son, just visiting him and trying to connect with him. How do you explain it? So, Tova, what I do want to say, what I'm hearing Tova say is God says, it's your mandate, but we have to join in the effort. That's what I'm hearing you say, Tova, am I right? God says, I will destroy, but ultimately you, it's a kind of, if I can, maybe I'm building in a little bit. It's a little bit of a partnership.
That you have to protect. That Israel has to protect its own, to take care of those who are in danger.
Right.
But
as much as when I read this, in my heart and soul, I say, they're Amalek. They're Amalek. It says Amalek is going to attack the unaware, the ambush you, the weak. I mean, they're killing little children. As much as I want to say it's Amalek, Tova, they're not Amalek. And the way this is understood, and I heard this from, I'm so sorry about my throat. I heard this from Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik, the Rav's younger brother, who had a profound influence on my life. He says that God declares, I will annihilate Amalek. He understood this to mean that God says only God can proclaim a people to be Amalek. And when it says you will destroy, it means that when God says that this nation is Amalek, then you're mandated to fulfill God's wishes. But today, God doesn't speak to us in such terms. There is no Amalek people, and God doesn't declare even that the Nazis are Amalek. Now, that doesn't mean that we should not be defending ourselves to the hilt, of course. And there are many, and I'm one of them, who believes Israel has to do war to stop this terror. This is intolerable. For me, there is nothing that justifies terror. And when the other side applauds these attacks and these killings and says it's in response to quote unquote occupying the West Bank, quote unquote, sorry, there is nothing that justifies terror. I've thought for a long time that if the other side would have a Martin Luther King leading the way, they would have had a state decades ago. The reason there's not 2 states is not our fault, it's their fault. They didn't accept it. We all know the history with Barak and Omer, the whole doggone history. So that's what the text is saying. God is saying, if I declare that this people should be annihilated, then you're mandated to follow my command.
well,
That doesn't exist today.
no, but what does exist is we still say Zechor et Amalek. Why? And I think Zechor et Amalek and what they did to our weakest, because they weren't protected, that we have to take care of our sick and our weak, and they have to be in our midst and not neglected. I think that's what it teaches us today when we say Zechor et Amalek.
Okay. Ruby, thank you, Tova. Ruby, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think we always know that there will be evil in this world. I think we all feel that way. However, do you ever question the extent of evil that God seems to allow? Not that their evil is around, but the extent of it that we see. Why isn't there, one could ask, God's intervention in much of this, or I can't say all of this, maybe that would sound too naive, but it just seems so like, where is God? Where is God and God to intervene for us at times? Is that something that's outrageous to ask of God?
No. I'm so moved by not only what you said, Ruby, but the way you said it. I actually have kind of tears in my eyes. Maybe it's something to do with my getting up there in years. But I asked that question very often. When I was younger, I remember just when I was a rabbi in Muncie, I would say, to the question, where was God during the Shoah? The question is not only where was God, but where was man? I didn't even say where was woman in those days. But that question doesn't go away, Ruby. And the way you formulated it, okay, there's one thing to have evil, but the extent of the evil, it's really, even if they're literally not a Amalek according to what we're arguing, they are Amalek-like. Just, it's the extent one wonders. And I think we have to ask that question, Ruby. And I think we have to make those demands. We have to ask those questions of God, and we have to ask those questions of ourselves too. I think I've shared with you that I had on my desk a conversation between two people, Ruby. And the first one says, I'm so upset with God. I want to ask God, why is there so much wickedness in the world? Why is there so much poverty in the world? Why is there so much racism in this world? Why is there so much sexual abuse in this world? So the second person says to the first person, Ruby, well, why don't you ask God that question? And the first person says, because I'm afraid God's going to ask me the same question. There's just something about that. It doesn't take away asking God, have you done your part? I've done my part. Are you doing your part? I'm doing the best I can. Estelle.
Isn't it a question of interpretation? I mean, when years ago they said God is going to take care of you against Amalek, and then other times it says you must take care of Amalek yourself. But isn't it just the century or the eon that made the interpretation? If today you're going to say God should take care of all these terrible illnesses or these terrible people, it's the wrong interpretation. Because if the people are going to depend upon God for everything, then it's just a matter of not doing anything. It's a matter of just opting out. But it's a matter of interpreting. If it was to take care of Amalek, and if you're going to sit back and depending on God, that may have been the way years ago. But it's just a question of how you interpret something. Isn't it always the way the Bible is interpreted? It can be interpreted one way and another.
I think you're saying it very well. One of the central ideas of the Torah is the idea of covenant. Covenant means we join in partnership with God. So, and there was a time when, or taking your point, Estelle, we're expected to do our share and to do away with the evil in the world. And that's what aspirational Judaism is all about. Everyone doing their share to try to make this world a better world.
But to sit back and say, let God do it.
Right, and I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Now we have to ask ourselves the question. We must do our share. We have to show the way. Arnie, did you want to say something? Arnie, you have to get off mute.
I have three random unfinished thoughts. I don't know where to go with them. I'd like to share them with you and see what you think. First of all, I once heard Rabbi David Silva say that in this verse, when they talk about stragglers, they're really talking about the non-believers among the Jewish nation. And even those people are protected by God. And I have to say, when I heard that, the level of empathy and love of Judaism in me got amplified by that comment, by a God who would even protect those who don't believe in him. Secondly, I'm struck by the transition from this verse about Amalek into the next verse in Ki Tavo, where it's the ceremony of the first fruits, and we're living in peace, prosperity, and security. You know, it's almost like you get whiplash from Amalek to that. And finally, I have to say, you know, because I'm getting softer as I'm getting older, as much as God is saying to always remember, don't forget the horrors of Amalek and wipe out the name of Amalek. Just like with the Palestinians, there are horrible things taking place, but most thoughtful, feeling people dream of someday when there will be peace. It may not be for decades, but someday there will be peace. And similar with Amalek. It's not mentioned, but maybe the goal is someday that there should be a peaceful world with or without Amalek in it. I just keep thinking of that verse. I know it's attributed to Rabbi Cook and Rabbi Nachman. If you believe in destruction, you have to believe in the rebuilding.
Beautiful. Arnie, thank you. I think every step, everything you said, you should keep a notebook of all your comments. One day we can put it all together. All of you should do that because the contributions are so beautiful. I want to leave you with one more thought that is a radical thought. And it'll take me just 2 or 3 minutes to say it, and then we'll open it up and then we'll call it a morning. I want to point to, we have said something about the conflict between the text where God says, I will destroy, in contrast to the text that says you will destroy. And Tova put us in that direction, I believe. I believe Ruby did, and as did Estelle. God says, yeah, but we're in partnership. And the way Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik understood is, it's only Amalek if God decrees it's Amalek, then we're mandated to destroy the Amalekites, but God doesn't speak in those terms today. But what I wanted to conclude with is the following. Back in the Exodus narrative, and if you have a chance, take a look at it, chapter 17, it's at the end of Exodus. You all have Bibles, and comparing it to the end of chapter 25 in the book of Deuteronomy, where God says, as long as there is an Amalek, I lift my hand on the throne, on my throne. God says, I'm lifting my hand on God's throne. I'm taking this oath that there will be a war against Amalek from generation to generation. And we pointed out open your hearts for this, that in the Bible, the throne of God is not written completely. It doesn't say kisei, it says case. And God's name is not complete. It doesn't say Yud Hey Vav Hey, it says Yud K. So here's what I'd like to put out there. This is based on a midrash quoted by Rashi. And that is the following. God says, and let me use Amalek widely, even though I've said there is no precise Amalek today. We don't kill innocent men. We don't kill innocent women and children. But God is saying, as long as there is an Amalek, as long as there is an Ayatollah, as long as there is a Michigan in North Korea, as long as there is a Hezbollah with rockets directed at Israel, as long as they exist, God says, my throne is incomplete. My name is incomplete. My name and my throne is incomplete. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that God is imperfect? That God is not whole? Well, what it means is the following, that God operates, this is not easy stuff, on two levels. On a philosophical level, God is self-existent. Does God need human beings to exist? No. God minus the world equals God. God minus the world equals God. God doesn't need human beings to exist. God is what they say in accessible philosophy. God is independent and self-existent. That's one level. But on another level, for God to be manifest in this world, for God to really be alive in this world, that's dependent upon humankind. Humankind has to embrace God and what God is all about. And so as long as there is an Amalek, God says, my manifestation, the way I appear in this world, the way I am in this world, is incomplete. Is there God in Iran amongst those leaders or amongst whoever the Hezbollah head is, whatever? Is that God? That's not. God is not there.
It's their God.
It's their God, but is it God as we understand God? And God is saying, as long as that evil exists, God in this world, my throne is incomplete. My name is incomplete. And here comes the kicker. Hold on to your chair. And in whose hands is it, Estelle, to bring God into this world? To make God real in this world? To see the manifestation of God in this world. In whose hands is it? It's in the hands of human beings. Now, this is taking Abraham Heschel to another level. Abraham Heschel wrote a magnificent work called God in Search of Man. If you were writing it now, we would write God in search of man and woman, or woman and man. Then man was very generic, referring to all of humankind. We're taking a step further. We're saying, and this is what's radical, it's not only that God is in search of the human being, God needs the human being. Without the human being, the Spirit of God, or what God represents, a God whose characteristic is justice and mercy and kindness. If we're not going to bring that God into this world, God is incomplete.
Yeah.
As I write in Torat Ahavah, while God's existence does not depend on humans, we have a strong and important role in God being manifest. Only through human effort will God be whole in this world, as the proliferation of the divine message to humans depends on us. Only through the eradication of evil, and more proactively through bringing love, justice, and compassion to our people and the world, will God be fully present, will God be fully manifest. Just one support proof and I stop. We all know the Olenu prayer. Olenu v'shabeach ladon hakol. One of the most important prayers is the second paragraph. Al kain nekaveh lecha Adonai Eloheinu. We're waiting for you, God. We're waiting for you to be manifest in this world. V'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai. To fix or repair this world according to the rulership of God. And at the end, we say that when that occurs, now we're quoting the prophets, we say in the second paragraph that time will come when the world will be repaired under the reign of the Almighty. And then we say, you all know it. What does it say? Ve'haya Adonai Lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Translation to that little ditty, B'nema, and the prophet says in Zechariah and Zechariah, V'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. The day will come that God will rule over the earth. Bayom hahu, what does that mean? Vivian, Bayom hahu, to my Hebraeus.
Okay.
On that day, Bayom hahu, Yihiyeh Adonai echad. On that day, God will be one. Ushmo echad, and his name will be one. Let's listen to what we're singing. We're saying, oh, and in the future, God will be the ruler over the earth. What does that imply? Now he's not the ruler. And then we say, Bayom hahu, on that day, God will be one, which implies today he is not one. And so we call out, God will be one and his name one. On that day, God will be one and his name will be one. And whether God becomes one, that depends upon us. As much as we need God, this is radical. As much as we need God, with all my heart and soul, I believe God needs us.
Absolutely.
Not only in search of us, God needs us. It's up to us to bring God into this world. Again, these two levels. Yes, God can exist without us, but for God to be in this world, that's up to us. We have to do our share. And I want to encourage you to read the Hebrew and the English of the Al Kain Nekaveh. It could be the most important prayer, could be the most important prayer in all of our prayer service. Let's open it up for a few more minutes. It's getting late. And please, I know Shuli had to attend to something. So please, anybody want to say a word?
Yeah. I
Please, Vivian.
say that we have a textbook to learn how to do that, and it's called the Torah. And the word Torah has the same shorish, the same basic word as to teach. And it's with that whole Torah, if you read the whole thing, it teaches us how to do this, exactly what you're saying. It's up to us. And it's filled with all kinds of commands to respect the elderly, to take care of the poor, take care of the sick people, all these people who are at the bottom of the list of valuable people. People need help and need all this support from the community and from people who are well. So learn that. Take that Torah and learn how to do it, and then we will have the proper situation in which we get rid of Amalek, who is just the opposite and attacked the rear of the people where the sick ones were, where the elderly were, all that which is against the basic Torah.
Yes, and Vivian, the word Torah, it sounds like Mora, a teacher,
Teacher,
a
yeah.
woman teacher, a man teacher, and the root is Yoro, Yud, Resh, Hey, which, as you say, it means to teach. It's, as we said it a few weeks ago, Martin Buber had struggled with the law, especially the ritual. He felt it was too narrow, it was too demanding. We try to argue that no, God is a God of love. And if a parent loves, a parent gives direction to children. A God of love commands. And that's exactly what the Torah is about. That's why the Torah is called Eitz Chayim. It's a tree of life, not just a tree of knowledge. It's a tree that is the key, is a key to life. Take one more comment, anyone? Ruth,
Yeah,
do you have any thoughts? I have such respect for you, Ruth. Any thoughts on this? I know we just did today.
May I, Rav Avi?
Yes, Judy.
Okay, the word, me and I like words and language. The word Amalek, if we deconstructed it, it's Am and then Lamed Kuf. Lamed Kuf is like part of, I was writing out the word Elohim, but not with a hey. So Amalek, maybe in the time when in the good times, when there will be peace and there will be no evil, including Amalek won't be evil, then the Amalek will change from the Lamed Kuf to the Lamed Hey, La Hashem.
Halavai, just on the other end, Amalek could be a composite of Am. Am means nation. Malak, Mem Lamed Kuf. Malak is a term in Leviticus, which means you should pinch the neck and cut it off. But your interpretation is a Judy interpretation. It just looks at the world and the hope the most evil will become good. Anyone else? One or two more comments and we'll stop. It's almost 11:30.
I'd just like to say that we have to remember that the whole world is God's creation.
Yes.
And everything, there are two sides to every coin. So there is goodness, but there's also evil. And this God gave us the world, but we have to deal with it. And we have to deal with both sides of the coin.
Right. And I do want to say, and we'll end with this, that there's a lot of evil in the world, but there's a lot of good.
Exactly.
There are beautiful people in this world, and the way it works is that, that a few evil people could destroy everything. This is more than a few, it's much, much more. But there's a lot of beautiful people in this world, people who live to make a difference, want to make a difference. And I'm looking at all of you, Bev and Ted. That's what all of you, your lives are about, just trying to be there and make a difference. And that's what the challenge is. The challenge is to stay humble and to do the best we can, v'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to perfect the world under the reign of the Almighty, which means the Almighty and the characteristics of what many of you have said, of goodness and kindness. There's a lot of good in this world. And you know, the world's a beautiful world. It's a beautiful, beautiful world. If only we would keep it beautiful and expand, as is our covenantal responsibility, on that beauty. So we've gone through one of the most difficult texts with all of the complications and all of my limitations. I hope it was of some meaning to you. And we'll pick it up, God willing, next week. I love studying with you. And I hope you
Love
find it
studying
of
with
some
you.
Thank you. God bless everybody. Zalman, be well. Everyone.
Thank you.
Shalom. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.